Shalom everyone, hope everyone's doing well. B'ezrat Hashem, today in Masechet Sanhedrin, we're going to continue on with Yutet Amud Aleph 19a, and we're beginning at the bottom of Yudchet Amud Bet, Choletz v'chotzin. We're going to have three sections in today's learning. The first will discuss why the Kohen Gadol cannot do yibum. The second discussion will discuss the Kohen Gadol and his relationship with death, how he's supposed to behave when he is a mate who passed away, or if others pass away, how he comforts. We'll go through different discussions in that regard. And in the final section we'll move on to a king, why he is not allowed to judge, be witness, and explain that as well. B'ezrat Hashem, as always, our learning today should be as a zechut, a merit for refuah shlema for Yaakov ben Dinah. We should hear of his speedy, quick, and full recovery, and only b'sarot tovot moving forward. So let's get started. The bottom of Yudchet Amud Bet, Choletz v'chotzin v'chulei. Now we had said in the Mishnah that a Kohen Gadol is allowed to do chalitza. His wife could receive chalitza, which is when a brother passes away, the other brother has the option to either do chalitza or yibum. Chalitza is to send away. Yibum is that the brother marries the deceased man's wife, meaning his brother's wife. Now, the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to do yibum. We said that in the Mishnah. So let's just speak this out and then we'll see it inside. It's very interesting. Regular Kohanim are allowed to marry a almana, they're allowed to marry a widowed woman, and they're also allowed to marry a girl who's not a betula, a girl who's not a virgin, and she's been married before. We'll explain there's perhaps a distinction between those two. Betula is as opposed to a beula. But a Kohen Gadol has a special halacha. There's actually an aseh and a lo taseh. So there's a positive command that says betula yikach, that he has to marry a betula, meaning a virgin girl. And there's also a lo taseh that says almana lo yikach. He can't marry a widow. For sure he can't marry a grusha, a divorced woman. That's a regular Kohen, also has that obligation. But he also has a lo taseh, almana lo yikach. He's not allowed to marry a widow. Now, the mitzvah of yibum is a mitzvah taseh. It's a mitzvah that he has to perform a positive command. There's generally a rule, mitzvah taseh is doche lo taseh. This is deduced in Masechet Yivamot, in the beginning of the Masechta, that if there's a positive commandment that comes into conflict with a negative commandment, the positive commandment overrides the negative. So the Gemara says as follows. Choletz v'chotzin, the Mishnah had said, the Kohen Gadol cannot do yibum and marry his deceased brother's wife. So kapasik v'tani, the Mishnah writes in general and does not distinguish lo shna mina erusin v'lo shna mina nisuin, that regardless if his brother passed away after the first stage of marriage, meaning erusin, or the second stage, which is consummation, called nisuin, Kohen Gadol cannot marry his wife, meaning he can't do yibum to the deceased man's wife. Now, bishlam mina nisuin, I understand why he can't do yibum if his brother had already consummated the marriage. Why? Because have aseh velo taseh. Because at that point, the girl is no longer a betula, so it's an aseh, isser aseh to do. And also there's a lo taseh that he's not allowed to marry an almanah, she's a widow. And the aseh of yibum will not override the aseh and the lo taseh that he's bound by. Turning to Yutet Amud Aleph, but ve'en aseh doche lo taseh v'aseh. The aseh of yibum does not override the positive and negative command of the Kohen Gadol. Ela mina erusin amai, but asks the Gemara, but at the stage of erusin, if his brother passed away after only having begun the marriage with erusin, she's still a betula. So all you're dealing with over here is the lo taseh, that he's not allowed to marry an almanah. Yavo aseh v'yitche lo taseh. So then the aseh, the mitzvah of yibum, should come and push off the lo taseh. He's not allowed to marry an almanah, and he should be allowed to do yibum. Why can't he do yibum if his brother passes away after the stage of erusin, before nisuin? So the Gemara answers, you're right. Midoraita, he would be allowed to do yibum, but it's a gzeira. Gzeira biyarishona etu biyashniya. Very interesting gzeira. The gzeira is like this. Really, the mitzvah taseh of yibum would override the prohibition of marrying a woman who's an almanah. The problem is that aseh of yibum only exists in the first time they have relations, because yibum is accomplished through relations. But subsequently, there's no mitzvah of yibum anymore. So then he's just living with an almanah, which is asur, and there's no aseh to push that off. So that's why it's gzeira. He can't do yibum, which would actually be permitted, because then he might continue to live with her, which is actually going to be asur. Tani Nami Yachi, the Braita also supports this. It says, Im kadmu ba'alu, if the Kohen Gadol went and had relations with the Yevama, with the woman, let's say from Erosin, Bi'ari Shona, Ba'alu Bi'ari Shona, he had relations with her, Kanu. So first of all, he acquired her. The Yibum is effective because Midaoraita, he actually could do Yibum. Ve'asur, however, it's Asur L'kaimanu Bi'ashniya, regarding the second relations, it would be prohibited because at that point there's no mitzvah taseh, as even though she's not a bitula, she was a bitula the first time around, now you're dealing with a situation where he's just with an almanah, which is asur to him, and therefore he can't even do the first one because he has to do chalitza and send her away, because it might lead to isur after the fact. Let's move on to the second section now. Now we had said in the Mishnah a series of halachot of the Kohen Gadol regarding how he deals with death, unlike normal people. So the first thing we'll discuss here regarding this is the machloket about following after the coffin. We had said, according to Rabbi Meir, Umin HaMikdash lo yetzei is not literal. He is allowed to follow after the coffin, but he needs to remain at a significant distance, which we explained is that when the people carrying the coffin go into an alley, he could be in the alley before. When it goes out of that alley, he can go into that alley, meaning he has to remain a significant distance away. So the Mishnah had said, Met lo met. Rabbi Meir gave his position. Tan Rabbanan, the Braita elaborates on the position of Rabbi Meir. Umin HaMikdash lo yetzei, it says the Kohen Gadol cannot leave the Beit HaMikdash. So it means lo yetzei mahen, he's not allowed to actually go out with the coffin. Aval yotzei hu acharihen, but he could follow behind them. Kate said, how is this possible? Hey nichsin v'hu nigleh, they will enter into the alleyway. I mean, they're covered and he's revealed, means he's in the previous alley, or around the corner, as you could call it. Hey niglin v'hu nichsen, when they are revealed, he is covered, meaning he can't be in the line of vision with them, but he could follow from behind as long as he's not that close with them. And we said that he can follow until the entrance of the gate of the city. When they leave there, he's not allowed to follow anymore because there's no more turns and it would be in line of vision with them. Now Rabbi Yehuda argued, Rabbi Yehuda said that's not the pshat. Mina mikdash lo yetzei literally means he cannot follow after the coffin across the board. He has to stay in the Beit HaMikdash. So Shapir Kam Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda seems to be saying a very good argument. How does Rabbi Meir explain the pasuk differently? So Amar Lecha Rabbi Meir responds, Ihachi, if what you're saying to take the pasuk literally is true, so Lebeito Namilo, he can't go out to his house also? Mina mikdash lo yetzei means he can't leave the Beit HaMikdash ever? Can't mean that he could go home at night. So obviously, what's the pshat in the pasuk? Mina mikdash lo yetzei means mikdushato lo yetzei. He can't leave his status of kedusha. We have to implement measures that can make sure he stays kadosh. And since there is a distinction, which means we make sure he's not that close, and when the coffin goes into one area, he's not in that area, so lo ati leminga, he's not going to touch the coffin, and that's permissible. Rabbi Yehuda argues because he says, Agav marared dilma mikri v'ati v'naga. We're worried, maybe because he's so bitter-hearted, he's so upset about the loss, that accidentally, even if he follows from a distance, he might go and touch the coffin, becoming tameh, so therefore he's actually not allowed to leave altogether, he has to stay in the mikdash. Now it's worthwhile noting, I just want to point out, that it is brought down, both of these drashot seem to be actually an asmachta. I saw brought down, one of the mefarshim here comment and say, really, this is not the simple pshat in the pasuk, but it's really an asmachta. He quotes the Ramban, the Ran, I see the article footnote says here. But either way you learn, this is the machloket, is it taken literally, like Rabbi Yehuda says, it can't go out altogether, we're worried, like we say, or Meir says it means he can't become tameh, so put in such a measure, and then it's acceptable for him to follow from a distance. All right, let's move on now to the next idea in regards to this section of regarding death. The next idea was regarding comforting. He said in the Mishnah, Kishehu menachem. We said when he comforts others, so there was a special way, as we'll see, the Kohen Gadol would do differently than the rest of the people. Tan Rabbanan, the Braita elaborates. If the Kohen Gadol was passing by with the row to comfort the mourners, meaning someone had experienced the loss, the Kohen Gadol was coming to comfort them. So usually, as we'll see, what used to happen was the mourners would stand still, and the Kohen Gadol, really, and all the people who were comforting would walk by and comfort them. So the Kohen Gadol had a unique way of doing this to emphasize his greatness. What was it? Sgan u'mashuach shavar b'yamino. The Sgan, which is the deputy Kohen to the Kohen Gadol, and the Mashuach Shavar, and I'll explain what this is in a minute, but it means the Kohen Gadol who had served in the interim, who was no longer in service right now, b'yamino. So they should be to the right of the Kohen Gadol, the right. V'rosh Beit Av, and the Rosh Beit Av. Rosh Beit Av is the head of the group of Kohanim that are serving that day. There were 24 groups of Kohanim. Each group was broken down into 6 or 7 parts. Each one served one day in the Beit HaMikdash. So whichever group of that day had a head of it, so he, Va'avelim, as well as the Avelim, the mourners, V'rosh Beit Av Avelim, V'chol ha'am mismolo, and the mourners and all of the other comforters would be to the left of the Kohen Gadol. So let's just set this up. We have the Kohen Gadol is in the middle. On the Kohen Gadol's right, you have the Sgan, the Mashuach Shavar on his right, and to his left is the rest of the people. Actually, the way it would be is you have the comforters, and then after that would be the mourners, and everybody would walk by comforting these mourners. Now, I just want to point something out. What is this section of Sgan and Mashuach Shavar? It's a very interesting idea. Is the Sgan, when a Kohen Gadol was appointed into service, he was given a deputy Kohen Gadol who would deal with certain administrative tasks, but also had the following important role. If a Kohen Gadol should become unable to serve for whatever reason, maybe he developed a temporary blemish, maybe he's tameh, whatever the reason is, the Sgan will be anointed into service to serve as the Kohen Gadol in the meantime. Now he's the Kohen Gadol, and when the Kohen Gadol comes back, that previous Sgan who served in the meantime now becomes what we just called Mashuach She'avar, which he's considered the anointed one who is now temporarily, he's been dislodged, meaning he's no longer serving. Now this Kohen Shavar, he now served as Kohen Gadol, so he can't go back to working as a Sgan. It's actually a machloket in Masechet Megillah, but therefore he takes on a greater role to some degree as a pseudo Kohen Gadol, and they would appoint a new Sgan, a new attendant, or a new deputy for the Kohen Gadol when he comes back to service. Now, as we said, those two people, I mean the Sgan, his deputy, as well as the previous Kohen Gadol who had been his previous deputy, would be on his right, and the rest of the nation, meaning the comforters and the mourners, would be on his left. Okay, now let's continue. This is when the Kohen Gadol is comforting others. However, when he is standing in the row and the comforters are coming to comfort him, meaning if the Kohen Gadol experienced the loss and others are coming to comfort him, so then Sgan miyamino v'rosh beit av v'chol ha'am mismolo, the Sgan should be on his right, the deputy of the Kohen Gadol, and on the left would be the rest of the nation, including the head of the Kehunah of that day in the Beit HaMikdash, and the rest of the people that are coming to comfort him. But the Mashuach, meaning the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen who had been previously his deputy, who was now dislodged from service because he returned to his position, he would not come to comfort the Kohen Gadol. Why? My time, what's the reason? Because it could make the Kohen Gadol feel worse. Savar kachadibi, because he could think that this Shavar is happy in my loss. Now, this is a very interesting idea. We're talking about even great people, but the problem is that naturally there could be a friction between the regular Kohen Gadol and the Avar. Because since the Kohen Shavar filled into his position, at least briefly, he also takes on a certain status as Kohen Gadol. So the issue is there could be a natural tension between the Kohen Gadol and that Kohen Mashuach She'avar. So therefore, we don't want him to show up when the Kohen Gadol experienced the loss, as it could make him feel even worse, as if he's enjoying my suffering. Therefore, he doesn't come that time. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, based on this entire Braita, he says like this: Shma mina mehamat nitat. We can deduce 3 principles from this Braita. Number 1. Shma mina hainu skan hainu memuneh. We see that just as in the Mishnah we discussed the memuneh, in the Braita it calls that guy a skan. So we see the skan and the memuneh is the same. Tosafot points out, because when it says Sgan in the Braita, when it says Memuneh in the Mishnah, it's obviously not referring to the Mashuach. The Kohen Gadol, the fellow who had served already as Kohen Gadol and was dislodged for now, because he was essentially on the level of Kohen Gadol. You can't call him Sgan. You can't call him Memuneh, excuse me. Memuneh has a lower connotation. So therefore you see Sgan and Memuneh are the same. It's the same position. The deputy Kohen Gadol. Bishmami now, we see a second principle, which is Avelim Omdim V'chol Ha'am Ovrin. We see also that the way that they used to comfort was that the mourners would stand still, and as we explained, all of the comforters would walk by them. Bishmami now, we see a third rule from this Braita, which is Avelim L'smol Hamenachamin Hein Omdim, that the mourners would stand to the left of the comforters. Right, as we explained, is that in both the Reisha and the Sefer, the beginning and the end of the Braita, is that the mourners would be on the left of the comforters, and the comforters would pass on their right. On their right. Why? Let's see back in the Braita, because we had said. At the end of the Braita, it said that the Kohen would stand and all of the mourners would pass by on his left. So the comforters would stand to the left of the mourners. A second. Yeah. The mourners stand to the left of the comforters. To the left of the comforters. To the left of the comforters. Because it says in the Brisa, it says that when the Kohen Gadol comforts others, the mourners are to his left. To his left, meaning so he's to the left. His left. The mourners are to his left. So the comforters are to the left. Really, you have to flip it around. The comforters are to the left of the mourners. Mourners stand to the left of the comforters. Meaning, I guess if I'm to the left of me would be the left of them. Meaning, if I'm standing and they're walking by, so I'm to their left and they're to my left. That's really, I guess, the bottom line. That's what comes out. Okay, fine. That is the 3 points that we deduced from the Braita. Let's go. Let's continue on. Okay. Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita. Now, the Braita shows us actually this idea that the mourners would stand still and the comforters would walk. This minhag actually changed, and we'll see. Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita. Barishona hayu avilim omdin. Originally, the mourners used to stand still. Chol ha'am ovrin, and during this time of the Shura, the nation would pass by and comfort them. The problem was vayu bet mishpachot b'Yerushalayim tagrot zu b'zu. There were two families in Yerushalayim who started to fight with each other. Who goes first to comfort the mourners? Zot omeret ani overet tchila. The one family said, we want to go first to comfort the mourners. Tizot omeret ani overet tchila. And the other family said, we want to pass first. So the Chachamim established the Yehei ha'am omdin, which is actually, this is the practically done today, is that the comforters should stand still, va'avilim ovrin, and the mourners should walk through. This is practically what's done today, because those two families were fighting. And this is a fascinating idea. There's two families, they were going to comfort, they're going to do a mitzvah, and they're so busy, who's going to go first? And because of that argument, Chachamim changed the minhag, that instead of having the mourners standing still, the comforter should stand still and the mourners should just walk by. Chazar v'alach v'siper siman. So the next three halachot we're going to see, which are said in the name of Rabbi Yossi, are acronym Chazar v'alach and siper. Amar Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama said, Echsi Rabbi Yossi et hadavar liyoshno b'tzipori. Rabbi Yossi actually returned the custom to its original status, its original ruling, sheyeyu avelim omdin, that the mourners should stand still, v'chol ha'am ovrin. So halacha number one, Rabbi Yossi said, is that they returned the halacha to the original state, which is that the mourners should stand still and the comforters should walk. Two, v'amar Rami Bar Chama, hitkin Rabbi Yossi v'tzipori, he established another halacha, and this is just in a list of halachot, it doesn't actually tie into mourning, but Rabbi Yossi established in Tzipori, shalo tehei isha me'alechet b'shuk ubna chareha, that a woman shouldn't walk in the market, in a public area, with her son behind her, meaning she should have her son in front of her. It's actually a logical thing, in order that she could keep her eye on him. Mishum ma'aseh shaya, because of a story that happened. So Rashi tells us there was a terrible story where a woman was walking in the market, and these pritzim, these lowly people, low moral character people, came from behind her, and her son was behind her. They kidnapped him. They stuck him into some sort of a locked area, and she started to scream. She didn't know where he had gone. So one of those robbers came and said, "I'll show you where he is," brought her to that house, and then they ended up abusing her. So in order to avoid like situations, Rabbi Yossi established that the women should have their children in front. They could always keep an eye on them that way, and not behind them when they can't see what they're doing. Very interesting. I mean, that's a terrible story, and the Gzeira makes logical sense also, to keep an eye on your kids. And 3, V'amar Rami Bar Abba, Rami Bar Abba says another thing, Hitkin Rabbi Yossi v'Tzipori, that Rabbi Yossi established in Tzipori, Sheyiyu nashim misaprot bebeit hakisei mishum yichud. So women should talk to each other in the bathroom because of an issue of yichud. So Rashi explains over here also, it used to be, they didn't have such sophisticated bathrooms as we had. They had bathrooms out in the fields. The problem is if two women would go into the bathroom and they were doing what they needed to do, a man might come in unknowingly that there's two women in there, and as the Gemara in Kiddushin tells us, there's an isur of yichud, of seclusion, for one man to be with two women. So in order to avoid that issue, if they talk to each other, the man will hear there's women in there and he won't go in, creating an issue of yichud. And even though you're not usually supposed to talk in the bathroom, this was allowed to avoid the issue of yichud from occurring. Let's continue. Rav Menashe bar Ut sha'ilet et Reb Yoshia Rabba bebeit ilmin dehutzal. I asked her, this Rav Menashe bar Ut said, I asked Reb Yoshia, the great one, in the cemetery of Hutzal. I saw, I think the Agot HaYavet, one of the commentaries here says, the reason, we're going to see this is a question regarding mourners. And the reason that it said that he asked him in the cemetery is because actually, and this is a discussion in the beginning of Masechet Brachot, which is, it's discussed in Masechet Brachot. It's discussed is, are you allowed to talk in front of the dead bodies, in front of in a cemetery? And the Gemara says, according to some shitot, it's a debate if you're allowed to or not. So the reason that he asked him the question in the cemetery, it's emphasizing that he asked him this question, is because you see, if it's matters relating to the process of burial or mourners, etc., that it would be permitted. But Amar Li, so I asked him, I asked Rabbi Yoshia of Rabbah in the Beit Ilmin beHutzal. So he says, I asked Rabbi Yoshia, the great one, in the cemetery of Hutzal, Amar Li, and he said to me 2 points. He said, firstly, Ein shura pchuta me'asara b'nei adam, that generally when you do this shura, which is where the comforters walk by the mourners and comfort them, you have to have at least 10 people. And since the mourners are being comforted, so they can't be part of the number, so you have to have at least 10 people other than them. 1 and 2. Bein sha'avelim omdin v'chol ha'am ovrin. Bein sha'avelim ovrin v'chol ha'am omdin. He said, and also both minhagim are acceptable, whether the mourners are standing and the comforters are doing the walking, or vice versa. They're both an acceptable custom. Okay, and we said in the Mishnah that the Kohen Gadol, when others would comfort him, Kishu mitnachem, they would say to him, we should be your atonement, and he would bless them. So the Gemara says, Ibailu, a question the Gemara wonders is, Ki menachem hu acharini, hechi amar lahu. If he goes to comfort others, what does he say to them? So Tashma, the Gemara says from the Braita, it seems to be clear, because it says, V'hu omer titnachamu. He tells them, be comforted. So well, what's the case? If others are comforting him, would he tell them, be comforted? Would he want to curse them? It's almost as to say, you should have a death and then you'll be comforted. That would be very inappropriate. Obviously, what does it mean when he's saying you'll be comforted? He's coming to comfort others who experience loss. So that's a proof that if he goes to comfort others, he'd say, Titnachamu, you should be comforted. And moving on to the third and final section, the Gemara now goes to the next part of the Mishnah, which talked about kings. Now we said regarding kings, they cannot judge, they can't be judged, they can't testify, and they cannot be testified against. So the Gemara tells us this is actually not a flat rule for all kings. Actually, As we know, after the days of Shlomo HaMelech, there was a split in Malchut, in the kingdom of the Jewish people. You had the northern region, which became known as Malchut Yisrael, the Yisrael region, the northern area, the Shomron, and you had the southern region, which was Malchut Yehuda, which was governed by the kings of Yehuda. So the Gemara here tells us this idea of not judging, not being judged, etc., only applies to the kings of the northern region of Yisrael, not Yehuda. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Lo shanu ela malchei Yisrael. It's only an issue to be judged, etc., for the kings of Malchut Yisrael, al malchei Beit David, but the descendants of Beit David, which is Malchut Yehuda, dan v'daninotan. They could judge and they could be judged. They could judge and they could also be judged. It's not a problem. Because the pasuk tells us in Yirmiyah, Beit David ko amar Hashem. So says Hashem to the house of David, Dinu laboker mishpat. Judge in the morning for justice, meaning you could judge clearly. So you see, Malchut Beit David, the kings from Yehuda could judge. It's only Malchut Yisrael that cannot. And based on that, we could deduce, we know if they can't be judged, how would they be allowed to be judged? We know the pasuk in Safan, we quoted this earlier, says, it says, investigate others, or investigate yourself, and then investigate others. And from this we deduce, or search others. Search within yourself and then search others. From this, Reish Lakish says, first you should fix yourself up and then go fix others up. So meaning, if they would not be allowed to be judged by others, certainly they would not be allowed to judge others. Ella, it must be, so therefore it must be, the fact that they're allowed to judge means also others could judge them. They could be litigants. It's only Malchut Yisrael that can't judge or be judged. So the Gemara says, I understand, Malchut Beit David could judge and be judged. We just brought a pasuk and a logic, fine. Ela Malchei Yisrael, my time alone. But what's the reason the kings of Yisrael would not be allowed to judge or be judged? So the Gemara answers, Mishum Ma'aseh Shaya, because of a story that occurred. Now we have in the history of the Jewish people, this is in the times of Bayit Sheni, the second temple. We had a king called Yanai HaMelech. Now this Yanai HaMelech, there's a long story with him. This seems to be in the beginning of the story, because at a certain point in the story, he got upset at the Chachamim and started to kill them out. But this must have been before, because we're going to see that there was a Sanhedrin, the Chachamim were around. And yet, they were very intimidated by him. So the Gemara tells us the following incident. One of the servants of Yanai HaMelech, and this was a king from Yisrael, from Malchut Yisrael, his servant killed somebody. So Amar lehu Shimon ben Shetach lachachamim. Shimon ben Shetach was the head of the Sanhedrin, and he said to the Chachamim, is even though it's the servant of the king, focus on this guy, this servant, and judge him. You have to judge him, figure out what's the appropriate protocol in this case. Second. Yeah. So, Shalchulei Avdecha Katal Nafsha, they sent a message to Yanai and they said, your servant killed somebody. So Shadre Lahu, so Yanai sent the servant to the court. He said, okay, judge him. Shalchulei, they sent a message back, Ta ant nami lahacha. They said, don't only send your servant, you also have to come here. Because it says, V'huad beva alav. The pasuk tells us that he will be warned, the owner will be also warned. Second? Yeah. The owner of the ox, this is referring to an ox that killed somebody, so the owner of the ox has to also present in court, because he is the owner of that animal that killed somebody, so he has to also be warned by the witnesses, or testified in front of. Amr Torah, what is the Torah telling us? Yavo ba'al hashor v'ya'amod al shoro, that when the ox is adjudicated upon, the owner of the ox has to be there too. So if your servant killed somebody, you have to be there as well. You're responsible to be there. So Ataviyativ. So Yanai HaMelech came and he sat down in court. Beautiful. So Amar le Shimon ben Shetach, the head of the court, turns to Yanai HaMelech and he says to him, Yanai HaMelech, amod al raglecha, get up on your feet, stand up, v'ye'idu b'cha, so the witnesses can testify against you. V'lo lefanenu ata omed, you're not just standing in front of us, a human court. El lefnei misha amar v'hayo olam ata omed, you're standing in front of Hashem. Because Shene'emar, the pasuk says, "Ve'amdu shnei anashim asher lehem ariv lefnei Hashem." It says the two people that have a dispute, meaning in court, they're standing up in front of Hashem. So therefore, this is a court case in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You should stand up. You're responsible to stand up. Now, Tosafot does point out over here is that generally the rule is by capital cases regarding monetary cases, first, regarding monetary cases, the psak din, it's only by the psak din that the litigants need to stand up, but throughout they don't need to. Now, l'chaora, you'd say this is a monetary case, so they don't really have to, he shouldn't need to stand up because this is his property. The Eved is his property. So either we could say it's considered capital in the sense that somebody was killed, that's possible, but Tosafot says, it's one answer, Tosafot said, Yesh lomar de dinei nefashot shani. This is dinei nefashot, so you have to stand up throughout. Alternatively, he says, even if it's a monetary case, when the witnesses testify, it's like the psak din being meted out, gemar din, and then even in monetary cases, the litigants have to stand up. So therefore, Yana was told by Shimon ben Shetach, you have to stand up. So Amar lo, Yana responded, lo kishetomer ata. I'm not going to do like you're saying. Rather, Ela kimashi yomru chaverecha. I'll do like your friends say, means let's ask your friends, let's ask the other members of the Sanhedrin if I need to stand up. Turning to Tet Mudbet. So Nifne liyamino, Shimon ben Shetach turned to his right, to the Chachamim. Kavshu pneim bekarka. They put their faces into the ground, meaning they pretended like they were busy thinking about other things. They didn't want to face Yanai and tell him you can't. You have to listen and stand up because they were nervous. Nifne lismolo. So Shimon ben Shetach turned to his left. Kavshu pneim bekarka. They did the same thing. So Shimon ben Shetach became upset. Amar lehen Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach said, "Ba'alei machshavot atem." Are you so busy in your thoughts? You're pretending like you're busy thinking about something, not to face Yanai and tell him that I'm right. Yavo bal machshavot. So Hashem, who knows your thoughts, should come, and He knows it's just that you're scared, but not that you're busy thinking about something important. V'yipara mikem, and should pay you back. He said to the other chachamim. Miyad ba Gavriel v'choftan bekarka v'metu. Gavriel came and he smashed these chachamim to the ground and killed them. So we see from the story, the point is that these judges were intimidated, that they didn't want to mete out the appropriate judgment or even have the proper protocol because they were nervous of the repercussions of dealing with the king. So ba'ota sha'a amru, at that time, the chachamim said, Melech lo dan, a king cannot judge, velo danin oto, nor could he be judged upon. Lo me'id velo me'idin oto. He cannot testify, nor can he be testified on. The point is that because of this story, the king had to be removed essentially from the courtroom because of the concern that it would intimidate the judges, and then it wouldn't be the appropriate protocol as is meant to be. But this is only by Malchei Yisrael, Malchut Beit David. As we said, Yehuda were not concerned about this, and the pasuk seems to imply then that it would be permissible for them to judge, be judged, etc. We're stopping at the 2 dots towards the top of Yotet Amud Bet. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll pick up with Yotet Amud Bet tomorrow. In the meantime, everybody have a wonderful day.